So I think at the international level, because countries do, like South Africa, we are signatories to international conventions, and then those laws or rules or instruments then influence our domestic laws, which then influence our processes of governing on the ground. I think that's something that really needs to be looked at, because I think it goes two ways, because I've done research on this, looking at a UNESCO World Heritage sites, but then this applies to other international instruments like the CBD, as you were talking about it. And I think there are two issues. The one issue is that I feel that governments in developing countries, in global south countries, sign into these conventions without taking into account the situation on the ground. And basically South Africa is an example where we have this history of people being dispossessed and marginalized and stripped of their rights to access resources, natural resources and other resources. And I think I think that should be at the forefront of the minds of decision makers when they go into these settings and they sign into those conventions and think about what do they mean for countries like South Africa and other countries with similar histories and so on. Because I think if that's not done, then we all end up with a situation where when those are being set up and put in place, then they don't really match what's happening on the ground. And they end up actually perpetuating injustices that were already existent on the ground, instead of improving and situations and providing more access to resources to people. They end up having an opposite effect if these things were not taken into account. If we really didn't think about what it would mean for day-to-day lives of people and the current arrangements for governing. So that's one thing. And the other thing I also find is that a lot of these international instruments, when they are formed together, it's not clear to me how context of different countries in the global south are taken into account, and also how voices of people in the global south are represented in those decision-making platforms. Because I feel that if those voices are not represented, then there's no way those instruments could reflect realities of those people in a more nuanced way that would actually make a difference on the ground. And I think this is probably also why we struggle, like South Africa struggles a lot with implementation from an institutional side, and also just in terms of the implications that those instruments end up having on wider communities. So I think that this is something that needs to be looked at in more depth, because for instance, when I can refer to the World Heritage Sites example that I looked at, I ended up wondering whether it was necessary to protect it at the international level, whether we couldn't have thought about protecting it first properly at national level, and then figuring out what things need to be taken into account given the history of the country before we open it up to the international community. Because once we do that, then we lose a lot of people on the ground. And in trying to do good, we end up not really having a major positive outcome, because people on the ground are not even aware. Like in the example that I'm talking about, people didn't even know what a World Heritage Site is. People living today in the World Heritage Site, they don't know what it means. So that's very telling about the processes that happen and why they need to be really thought about, especially where there are histories of marginalization that are involved.